Welcome to the Line Movement MMA betting show. I'm Daniel Levy from Best Fight Picks and Half the Battle, joined now by Dan Tom of MMA Junkie and the Protect Your Neck podcast. Today, we're going to be taking a first look at this Saturday's card, which features Edmund Shahbazyan, the Golden Boy. He's fighting in the main event against perennial top 10 Derek Brunson. And Dan Tom, you already know the deal. If you want a title shot in the middleweight division, you need to go out there and not just defeat Derek Brunson, but finish him impressively.
Absolutely, man. I think the word gatekeeper has been demonized, and I don't think that's very fair. To be a gatekeeper in the UFC, you know how much of a small percentage of people you have to be, regardless of what division. So, in no disrespect do I mean toward Derek Brunson or that term, but you're right, Dan. You know he kind of is that hurdle he has to get over. And man, Armenian fighters have had a hot hand recently in the octagon.
They truly have. We're going to get down to all that right here in a second. But first, a little housekeeping. Want to give a shout out to all our followers, all our fans. Thank you so much for your support. Make sure you follow us at line_movement. Comment down below. Let us know what you think. And also, this is very exciting because i3 Interactive, Line Movement, and now BlitzBet, a publicly traded company on the Canadian Security Exchange. Another part of our company just launched today. Make sure you go to blitzbet.eu. They're currently accepting Canadian depositors only, but keep your eyes peeled, and you never know what the future holds. So blitzbet.eu, go to linemovement.com. Very thankful to be a part of this group. Shout out to our producer, Jordan, to our editors behind the scenes, the real MVPs, everybody, Joe, James, Dan. Thank you guys so much. And Dan, Tom, let's get right down to business because in the main event, we got Edmund Shahbazyan. He's currently a minus 340 favorite. He's taking on Derek Brunson, who's plus 280. And like I alluded to, if you want that title shot, if you want a chance to wear gold around your waist in that division, you need to not just go out there and beat Derek Brunson. You need to finish him impressively. We're talking about guys like Robert Whitaker. He finished Derek Brunson, title shot. You look at the current champion, Izzy Adesanya. Now, officially, it says that he had to fight Anderson Silva in between then, but that was more so of a, let's go out there, put on a nice little exhibition match in a way, a nice little Mortal Kombat Tekken type back and forth showing just to put on a show for the fans down under. And then you pass that test, then you get your title shot. That's exactly what happened. I know for a fact Edmund Shahbazyan goes out here and wins this fight, he's one step closer to that elusive UFC title shot, Dan Tom.
It's hard not to draw those parallels, right? And say what you will about either fighter or the path, you got to be happy for things like that because it shows process, it shows precedence. And as far as people like myself, who, even though I feel like fairly criticize the matchmaking at times, let's be honest, folks, UFC matchmaking can be really rough. So I like them taking these steps. Now, does that mean it could be a step too far? It certainly could, Dan, on Saturday night. Despite my official pick perhaps not disagreeing with the favorite, heck, you could argue that there is value on the underdog here. If you're just playing by the numbers and the surface, Dan, some of my favorite underdog archetypes are durable southpaws who can wrestle. However, I used the word durable there, didn't I? And as we've seen, Derek Brunson, he can do the shaky leg dance, and as we've seen, Edmund Shahbazyan. Don't be fooled by the Glendale Fighting Club. Don't be fooled by this kid looking young and super green from the outside. He obviously can hit. He spent a lot of years, which I'm sure we'll talk about, with his background overall striking with amateur boxing. So that is the outcome that I think people maybe can't get their heads around, which is why we're seeing a 3-1 spread in what could be a dangerous fight.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And what's interesting is you look at this kid, Edmund Shahbazyan, 11-0 with 10 first-round finishes, Dan Tom. So, that leads to the question, what happens if he goes past round one? Well, the one time he did go past round one, things got kind of sketchy. Now, I personally disagree with that Darren Stewart fight being scored a split decision because I don't understand how you can score any round besides round 3 for Darren Stewart. I thought that Edmund Shahbazyan dominated him for the first 10 minutes of that fight, has some sketchy moments in the third, but ultimately that's a 29-28 on my scorecard. So I don't see any justification for Stewart winning that fight. And the reason I'm bringing that up, because, I know we're talking semantics and this and that, but a unanimous decision looks so much better on your record than a split decision. A split decision implies that the other guy could have won, that the other guy had this great success, that the other guy arguably won 2 rounds. And, Dan Tom, the other guy did not arguably win 2 rounds. He only won 1 round. So that's a 29-28 unanimous decision as far as I'm concerned.
Agree. And perhaps, I don't know how deep we'll get, but there's examples of it on this card. There's examples of it in their own division, the middleweight division. You look at Robert Whitaker's fights, but you can fight your way back out of a 10-8 situation. And even though Shabazian did gas, which is what, people of supporters or people that are supporters like me and as well as fair critics like to see, those guys that don't get out of the first round. You know me, Dan. I like to be skeptical on those angles when it comes to that. But there's two sides to that coin, perhaps that you're even alluding to. You can let me know, which is that yes, he did struggle in that third round. Yes, I do give it to Darren Stewart. But if you remember, Shabazian's able to scramble back from what looks like really suspect positions where he's taking those shots from Turtle. He actually wrestles his way back, gets multiple takedowns, lands multiple strikes, and is the one finishing on top. So it's really, it's really similar. It's like, how do you look at it? Do you look at it as they lost the round, or do you look at it as they overcame adversity and still won the fight? So I don't want to condemn Shabazian for that. Just like I didn't even condemn Darren Stewart, despite agreeing with you, Dan. I went ahead and played, Darren Stewart against what was his name? Little
Bartos,
Cormier, little
Deron Win.
Deron Win, I believe later on. Because of the things that I saw in that fight. So I'm not trying to condemn either guy, but I agree with your point. It was a clear 29-28, but you got to wonder, what does it look like if this fight starts, getting outside of the first round where Edmund is so dangerous. Does the veteran experience come into play for Brunson, or like we've seen before, Dan, in victory or defeat, we've seen Brunson slow down himself in the third round. So what does this start to look like if it starts getting out of the early rounds?
Yeah, that's some great questions. And obviously, I wouldn't condemn Shabazian or Darren Stewart. It's more so condemning that one judge that scored it for Darren Stewart. Cause it's like, I see the argument for the draw, even though I personally had it 29-28. But in under no circumstance can you score that first or second round for Darren Stewart. You just can't. I mean, you even go back to his corner before the third round, his coaches are like, Darren, you're down 2-0. We need a finish here. So even they know what's up. So I just don't see the justification. But to your point that hey, he did end the round on top. Not only did he end the round on top, Dan Tom, he scored 2 takedowns in the first, 2 takedowns in the second. That's 4 total. And then he scored 4 takedowns in the third round, Dan. So, I mean, this guy's going out there putting up numbers. 8 takedowns. I know DraftKings players are looking at this kid and they see the money signs in their eyes.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I don't know if he's going to get his takedowns against Derek Brunson's 100% takedown defense rate, but for what it's worth, from the analyst perspective, I have seen enough hints to show that his high school wrestling creds aren't BS, and he was grappling even before he was doing high school wrestling. So he's no slouch in those spots, but I do like his scrambling and what I've seen from a defensive perspective, because I think that's important to keep in mind too. I'm not sure that, Shabazian's going to be going out here and hitting double legs like he did against Darren Stewart.
Yeah, no, I feel you on that. Like you said, 100% takedown defense for Derek Brunson. But the reason I brought up the wrestling is because everybody only talks about the first round finishes, right? And we can talk about that, 11-0, 10 first round finishes. So the first round finishing potential is there. It's just that what happens if that doesn't work? What happens if this fight goes past the first round? Those are the kind of questions you need answers to. And what I like most about Shabazian is that he's so relaxed in there and he's not out there winging big shots. Actually, his punches come straight down the middle and he seems so focused and calm, which I like for a kid his age. And you go back to the Stewart fight, I know I keep referencing it because I mean that's the one sample we have of him going past the first. But to see a kid who was what 20 21 years old have the wherewithal to keep his head on the grindstone, keep going forward, that kind of stuff really impresses me, Dan. And also back to the stylistic clash on the feet. I mean, we can't leave this breakdown without talking about Brunson running, face first with that chin straight up in the air, lunging with his punches. I just feel like a straight 2 down the pipe might be all she wrote.
Yeah, absolutely. And the worst part about that, Dan, about Brunson doing that is that not only does it cause, the odds makers and the bettors to kind of go all over the place as far as overcorrecting their steering wheel, but it causes Brunson to overcorrect his steering wheel to where he can get in these staring contests to where I pick Anderson Silva and have no issue with him winning, as I know you do, Dan. But to be fair to Brunson, he could have won that fight if he would have made certain adjustments. And we've seen that so many times in Brunson's fights. However, he is now finally training at a big camp. No disrespect. I know about, Manu Natal and the good Muay Thai training and other people in that area, but he's now at the big camp in South Florida. second or third camp now at Sanford MMA. It seems like he's finding a balance, which doesn't seem too fan friendly nor reliable despite him winning fights. Do we see this more measured style, I guess, come out is my worry here.
Well, I mean, I think the thing with that is that you don't want to put too much stock into him going to a new camp. And the reason I say that is because he could have fought Elias Theodoro at any point in his career, any camp, whether it was Jackson's, whether it was his home gym in South Carolina, whether it's, down here in Atlanta with Manu or his new camp in Sanford, Florida. I don't give a shit where he's training. He's beating Elias Theodoro any day of the week. So to me, the change in camp really has no impact because until I see Derek Brunson fighting with his hands up and his chin down, the camp makes no difference whatsoever to me. It's all about his approach because, yeah, he might have been training with Manu for the Izzy fight, but again, he could have been training in Florida for the Izzy fight too. He would have got knocked out in the first round no matter what. So I don't think that this new camp, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to sit here and say it's not making a difference. I'm just not putting any stock into it. I mean, the guy is in his mid 30s. This is the version of him that we're going to see. So it's about, can he come out here and use his normal game plan to beat a guy like Edmen Shahbazyan? That's honestly what it comes down to in my mind.
I agree, man. The betting lines can always make talking points tricky, Dan. But this is betting lines aside, this is the perfect test. And that's how I'm kind of approaching this fight, even from a betting perspective. So I guess you're gonna have to ask yourself what kind of chalk is worthy, what kind of player are you? But I guess tipping my hand as I often do, as again, hit us up in the comments, folks. We like seeing those comments there. Follow us at line movement at line_movement. But I'm gonna, give you guys the tip of my hand on my main event pick here first, which is, yeah, man, I got Shahbazyan, and I don't necessarily think it gets done in the first. I am worried for the reasons we talked about, Dan, of it going very late, but I do seeing it end by the time before the third round ends. Let's just put it that way. And I think Shahbazyan is going to be the guy with his hands raised, based on what I'm seeing, what's going to happen in exchanges.
Yeah, and look, and one thing we got to talk about, I mean, we mentioned the coaching situation for Brunson. How about the coaching situation for Shahbazyan? And I know a lot of people like to give his head coach a lot of shit, which I don't actually agree with at all. I actually think Edmond Tarverdian's not a bad coach at all. When you walk into Edmond Tarverdian's gym, you will see 6 UFC belts there. So that alone should give him all the credentials he needs. And you want to take it a step further because I know, let's go back to the Ronda Rousey era. And listen, we all know, Ronda's a little fragile ego. You guys already know the deal. So of course, Coach Edmond was going out there and saying shit like, she can box with Floyd Mayweather. Of course, he was going out there and saying, oh, she's firing with both hands now. So, I mean, it's like, do people want him to go on there and be like, dude, she'd get fucking killed by Floyd Mayweather? Of course not. Ronda was completely surrounded by yes men. I mean, if you want this guy to get his paycheck, he better say what they're telling him to say. So I don't hold any of that stuff against Edmond Tarverdyan. I personally don't think he's a bad coach at all. And the proof is, look what he's done with Edmond Shahbazyan. Look what he's done with some of his boxers. I think he's a solid coach, and I think there's a huge misconception based on how we talked about Ronda Rousey.
Well, I got love for Edmund's background in kung fu and all that. I don't know if I'm willing to go as far as you, Dan. Again, this isn't a show. We're not beyond dissension here, but I get the spirit of what you're saying, and that is fair. Although you're talking about yes, man, I just keep thinking about yes, Jake. Speaking of which, I won't say who, but again, giving you guys a little dish here for rewarding you for being on Line Movement. Let's just say I do know a fighter who may have bet upwards of 20 grand or so on Edmund Shahbazyan in that Darren Stewart fight. Now, Dan, I only mentioned that because think about bets where there's certain sweats that might have costed you some years of your life, or a week maybe, or a day. Hopefully we're not betting too much towards more than that. I got to imagine betting that amount of money, at least for a guy like me. Okay, that's a big bet if we're talking 20 G's worth. And that's going on a sweat of all sweats in that third round when Darren Stewart's landing those shots. I got to imagine my friend there might have lost a year of his life just sweating that bet out.
Yeah, no, I mean, hopefully he's using proper money management, and 20K, in accordance to his bankroll, is something that he can afford to lose. But luckily he went out there and he won that bet nonetheless. So yeah, I mean, look, even no matter what amount you got on the line, when there's money on the line, yeah, you feel it. You feel your heart pound that extra beat, the sweat, this and that. But sometimes things go according to plan, and sometimes it's an amazing feeling. So that's why we keep diving into this game. But yeah, we can save the Coach Edmond debate for a different time. I think more so my point that I was trying to make was that it's so cool to be in the MMA scene and talk about how Coach Edmonds this shitty coach, because
Totally,
you
totally.
saw him make a couple of quotes about Ronda Rousey. But again, if you really think about it, he's got 6 UFC belts in his gym, which is more than some of these big name gyms. And also, it's like, did you want him to say Ronda was going to get knocked out? Did you want him to say Ronda's got no hands? Because I'm gonna tell you this: if he went out there and said that kind of stuff, he'd be missing out not only on most of his paycheck, but he'd be missing out on his star pupil too.
Yep, and again, Armenians got the hot hands, man. So you gotta put some respect on their names right now, man.
So in terms of the pick, I'm going with Shahbazyan as well. I just feel like it's a situation where when Brunson decides to blitz, that's when he's going to get countered with something big. I guess my biggest worry, at this kind of chalk would be if it turns into, this 3-round wrestling match where it's going back and forth and Edmund gets tired. He couldn't knock him out in the first, and all of a sudden he's on his back, late into the second, and, Brunson's kind of grinding it out. That would be the situation I'd be most fearful of. It's just that Shabazian's not really a reckless dude. He's kind of measured out there. He's been doing martial arts his entire life, and I like how focused he is, and the fact that we've seen him in that kind of adversity. Because I remember at the beginning of Derek Brunson's UFC career when we saw him in that 3rd round in Atlanta, Georgia, or Gwinnett, Georgia, actually, versus Yoel Romero. And I know Yoel Romero is a different animal than Darren Stewart. However, one could argue that Derek Brunson was up 2-0 in that round, in that fight going into the 3rd round. And that 3rd round wasn't just a matter of Yoel being a better athlete or Yoel being a better man. It was also adversity presented itself to Derek Brunson, and he couldn't overcome it. Period. Point blank.
Yeah, or either that or the gas tank, and either way, that pie chart is not very favorable, which makes it hard to, even if you want to be an underdog or veteran supporter, to see it here. Last point as we move on, because I think it'll tie into a lot of these rest of these fights, Dan, is just the small cage. I think also will force exchanges that'll make Derek Brunson uncomfortable.
Interestingly enough, you bring up the small cage. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, the last time Edmund Shabazian fought in the small cage was that the sketchy Darren Stewart fight. So he's got experience. He overcame adversity once in that small cage. Let's see what happens Saturday night against Derek Brunson in the main event.
That's right.
Co-main event in the evening, we got Joanne Calderwood taking on Jennifer Maia. And look, I'm gonna just go ahead and tell y'all my pick is Joanne Calderwood. I think she's the better fighter. I think she's got more output. I think she's more well-rounded. However, one big factor I want to bring to the table, Dan Tom, is that she was getting ready to fight Valentina Shevchenko. And when you go to sleep every night knowing, hey, like, I got to fight Valentina, when you wake up every morning knowing, hey, I got to run a couple extra miles this time because I'm fighting Valentina, that's the biggest motivator that could ever present itself to you. Because every time that the champ fights, the challenger is always going to be the best version of themselves because they know what they're up against, right? So knowing you had to fight Valentina, I mean, I'm expecting the best JoJo ever. It's just that then you get the call and it's like, hey, you're not fighting Valentina. Actually, you're fighting someone you probably never heard of. Here's Jennifer Maia. So while I'm not questioning Joanne's work ethic, it's more so like I know she's not going to bed with that same fire. I know she's not waking up with that same intensity. Like, oh, it's Jennifer Maia. Like, I could get highlight reeled on national television. I doubt she's even thinking that. She's probably like, oh, this is a walk in the park. I'm going to go out there, teep and run, mixing takedowns when I want, and easily win this decision. So, is it possible that an even less motivated Joanne Calderwood still comes out here and styles on Maya?
It's very possible. That's definitely, as you say, Dan, the letdown spot, right? And I'm glad that you brought up that part because I want to bring the other part that I believe coincides with that, which is the public part of it. It's a lesser important part because the public or us degenerate bettors or sharp bettors, we're not the ones stepping in there to fight. However, it is worth mentioning because I think the public in these lines can kind of get carried away too. Oh, she's supposed to be the next one. However, I was really glad to see that the line, odds makers and public alike, I think is rightfully pretty close here. I'd love to get your opinion here in a second, Dan, as far as where you think the line is. Obviously, you're with who the favorite is with your pick, no question. Tipping my hand. I think it is too for the output and whatnot. Also, to mention Syndicate MMA has quietly stocked up. They're not American top team level, but as far as the West Coast offerings of big gyms, right with their neighbors, Extreme Couture, of course, got a decent female stable there to work with. However, yes, is it a big letdown spot? I'm going to go and take Joanne Calderwood. You can let me know where the line is. And also, speaking of the small cage, could we see a weird kind of bully factor from Maya? We've seen her do that unpopular cage grind when she can't get the takedowns or when the striking isn't so in her favor. With the smaller cage, she's the bigger girl who's had experience at a bigger weight class. I guess that's the path that's kind of jumping out for me as far as underdogs here.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, she's gonna have to go out there and have a performance that she's never had before, and to win this fight. I truly believe that Joanne's more skilled across the board, and more so than the techniques, it's the output, it's the activity that I think is gonna win her this fight. But again, we got to pay attention to the scales. If because during this quarantine, man, people that haven't been showing up in shape have not been winning. But I don't think that's going to be the case with JoJo. The people she's been training with. I mean, her head coach is her boyfriend. So if he's not on her, then no one is, right? So currently they got minus 140 for Calderwood and plus 120 for Maya, which is kind of interesting because it did open minus 185 for Calderwood. So a lot of action on Maya. And I'm curious if people genuinely think Maya's going to win or if they're kind of riding off, that scenario I brought to the table, about she could possibly be less motivated in this potential letdown spot.
Yeah, Maya does, although it doesn't really show, she's more of a positional player. She does have some jujitsu creds as well. We've seen JoJo shine and falter in the submission area. So I could totally see why maybe people are taking those flyers. That's not nor won't be me for what that's worth. So that is definitely an interesting note. I will say you mentioned shape, Dan. Last thing about this, Jennifer Maya, it takes a lot for her to get down to 125. In fact, I know I called the last time ahead of time that she was going to miss weight. And I believe I even said it was something to look out for the last time she missed weight. That being said, I do my social media scans. She's looking in better shape than I probably have ever seen her coming in. Is that a bad thing? Did she worry about too much about, the weight and showing up to the dance rather than anything else? Maybe, but it's pandemic era. Everybody's kind of on an even playing field. Point is, you're getting an in shape Jennifer Maya for whatever that's worth.
Now, in the featured bout, we got a very exciting welterweight matchup between Vicente Luque and Randy Brown. And man, this is such an amazing fight. And obviously, Vicente Luque has won 10 of his last 11 fights. And this guy goes out there and wins fights. And with Randy Brown, super long, super athletic. He could be very dangerous too. It's been a situation where we've seen the talent this entire time, but now, I mean, that he's maturing, he's getting up there in age, he's finally hitting his prime. We're seeing the best version of Randy Brown we've ever seen. It's just that in this specific fight, if if Randy can't knock out Vicente and this becomes a 3-round war, do you think Randy Brown is mean enough to beat a guy like Vicente Luque?
That's the thing. I think, full disclosure, I guess my pick is going to be Luque here. However, not saying you shouldn't play Luque if you're a big believer. I'm just I'm giving respect to Randy Brown despite not picking him. In a recent interview, and we'll talk about the styles here in a second, but in a recent interview, I like that he has that chip on his shoulder. This feels like a spot, perhaps it's the pandemic era, Dan, but even otherwise, this feels like a real trapping spot, despite we've seen, us seeing Luque have similar success against similarly framed individuals, I guess you could say. However, this feels like one of those spots, and I do like the chip that Randy Brown has on his shoulder. However, in said interview, and shout out to our colleague there, James Lynch, whose interview I'm referring to, he also mentions that he doesn't like getting in the war, that he has the tools to stay out of a war. And, he's got opportunistic finishes and pinpoint thing. And I agree with him on that part. In fact, if he is going to win, it's probably going to have to be some really pinpoint, well placed shots to Luque, who doesn't always respect, or even if he does, doesn't always have the multiple layers of defense. You see Randy Brown maybe catching one of those opportunistic shots. Sure, I don't hate him or anyone else backing him for thinking that. However, I don't like that idea to what you just asked me, Dan. that if it does get ugly, if it does get to a war, I don't like a guy telling himself he's not going to get into a war because he's never gotten to a war before. You shouldn't tell yourself you're not going to get into a war against a guy, A, like Vicente Luque, who B, you're fighting in the small cage, but C, your reasoning for said statement should not be because you haven't gotten into a war. Even though Luque perhaps gets into too many wars, which we can talk about, perhaps even you could accuse him of fighting to his opponent's level, which you could also accuse Luque of. You also got to like that, hey, we have seen him in wars, and technically he hasn't been stopped yet. Whereas Randy Brown, we haven't seen him in all those wars yet against this high level opposition. And he's saying that he wants to stay away from that here. That's a big flag for me. That being said, I still find myself respecting Brown here. Talk some sense into me, Dan.
Look, Randy Brown, I mean, on paper, and when you just see him, he looks amazing. I mean, he's this tall, athletic guy, and you keep thinking, man, when Randy Brown finally puts it together, he's going to be such a problem for these guys to deal with. It's just that one thing I've come to realize, and before I say what I've come to realize, it's let me just preface this by saying I had the biggest bet of my life ever on Randy Brown when he fought Mickey Gall. So it's like I know I'm very familiar with Randy Brown. I know what he brings to the table. But as far as something missing, when you're talking about the top 10, Dan Tom, I mean, when you're talking about the top 30, top 50, he can go out there and style on these guys. But when you're talking about the top 10, everything has got to be in order. And I feel like there's a mean streak missing from Randy Brown's game. I think that's what it's been this whole time. And it only took me until now to kind of realize it because I've always been trying to point my finger on it. Like, what's Randy's issue? Why didn't he finish Mickey Gall in the first round? Like, why did he lose that Nico Price fight? Like, what exactly is the issue that's preventing him from winning or not just winning, but like dominating these fights that he should be blowing these guys out the water. Like that Mickey Gall fight should have not gone past the first round. Like if he's really as good as I think he is. But the thing is, man, that mean streak is missing. If Randy Brown can go out there and style on you and it can be a pretty fight, that's where he does his best. But when you start hitting him, when you start chopping down his calves, when you start mixing in takedowns, that's when things get a little shaky. And with a guy like Luque, it's all but guaranteed that he's gonna go out there and bring the war to you. And yeah, there's obviously a chance that eventually Luque is gonna go down. He takes way too many punches and someone's gonna knock him out eventually. Maybe it's Randy Brown, maybe a big knee up the middle, maybe a straight right, whatever the case may be. But if that doesn't happen, I'm telling you right now, Dan Tom, that Luque is going to go out there, hit him with some big hooks, hit him with some calf kicks, chop him down, and eventually put him away. So, yeah, I think Randy Brown has to have the perfect fight of his career to win this. And hey, if he proves me wrong and he can go back and forth, he can go life and death, then maybe he can win because he's got all the athletic tools. Like no one's denying his talent or his natural abilities, not at all. It's just that you need a little bit more than that when you're in the top 10. And I deep down don't think that he has that mean streak. Let's see if he proves me wrong.
It's too early to for me to sing if I'm going to be playing any parlay pieces or a name like Luque, who was within a straight was more than what well within a straight play range. And he's definitely my pick. But you know what? As you're putting together those pieces this time around, perhaps I'm putting together those same pieces now with your help, Nan. Because yeah, it's really making sense because that kind of what you said coincides to that point in the interview. What he himself kind of revealed, right? And that is a flag to me. So yeah, man. Like I said at the top of my take on this, this could definitely be a spot where it seems like it should have been minus 400 in hindsight, and no one should be questioning the minus 175 to minus 200 range you can get Luke in roughly, right? So it could very well be that I could be very well playing it. I'm feeling a little more confident after kind of going back and forth with you there. But yeah, that's good. That's definitely something to look for, right? Regardless of the result, is that Randy Brown is going to need that gear. To be fair, which I think is more than a fair critique, Dan, he's going to need that gear to enter that top 10 and top 15 as far as, walking in and beating these names.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It's just I think the reason the line is where it is because people are waiting for the day when Vicente gets knocked out. I mean, he eats so many clean strikes. He doesn't move his head at all. And honestly, some people's perception of that last fight with Nico Price is completely off. People are saying that Nico was winning, which is total bullshit. People are saying that Vicente was close to losing. Total bullshit. Like, yes, Vicente ate clean shots just like he does every single fight, Dan Tom. But the reality is, Luque was up 2-0 going into the third round, and then he knocked him out in the third. So to me, he was not close to losing that Nico Price fight at all. So I think it's a situation again. He's won 10 of his last 11, but people are waiting for this one moment where his chin's going to give out. Could it be Saturday night against Randy Brown? We know Randy Brown's talented enough. We know he's got the physical capabilities. It's just if he doesn't hit him with some flash shot, can he go through the war and win that way? I don't think so. I'm going Luque.
Yeah, man. And again, I'm not trying to be a small cage believer or try to convert anybody here, but you got to think that in these type of matchups where this is the dynamic at play, the small cage is only going to amplify the guy that is looking to try to make it a war, right? So, yeah, no, I got Luque here too. Probably going to be inside the distance. Look out for the leg kicks and the left hook, baby.
So in the lightweight division, we got the rematch between Lando Venata and Bobby King Green. And this is a really exciting fight because I know you remember the first time they fought, it was a draw. And there's obviously a lot of controversy about that fight because, Lando isn't exactly known for his fight IQ. And what I mean by that is the first round starts and Lando actually drops Bobby Green. Looks like he's about to finish the fight. Bobby Green starts to get back up. An illegal knee by Lando lands. Then now we're docking points. Now we're doing the whole bit. So let's get to that because had Lando not landed that illegal knee and been docked a point, he would have either won by first round knockout or he would have won the decision had it gone. But since he was docked a point, he couldn't win the decision. But there's another way to look at it too. When you see a fight that goes to a draw, and it was pretty close because I thought Lando got the first round, I thought Bobby got the second and third, and you see a plus 130 on Bobby Green. Now, is this a spot where you take the shot or not? Should this be a pick 'em or not? That's my big question because I personally don't feel comfortable laying chalk on a guy like Lando. I think that he's super unreliable. I think people built up an image of him that is completely false. Don't get me wrong. He's an exciting fighter. I like watching him compete, but the way people refer to him, I mean, he still has a rub from that Tony Ferguson fight where he was finished in under 1.5 rounds. Next fight goes out there, spin kicks John McDessie. But after that, I mean, it's been the most inconsistent career you've ever seen. So that being said, Bobby Green, he fought a couple months ago, got another solid win. I mean, who do you edge in this fight? Just stylistically speaking, how do you see this one going down, Dan?
For what you said, for what it's worth, peeking behind the curtain, there are some fights that I'm still finishing up some research, and I'm always clear on that. I went deep into this one, Dan. I probably went deeper than I needed to, Dan, because you're right. It probably should be an even. It probably should be even, just as far as principle goes. Speaking on strictly principle, it should be even, especially when. Uh, Not that it should mean anything because Bobby Green was a dog heading in, but yes, people like myself picked and actually favored Bobby Green the first time. And again, laying a caveat here, even people who opinion that I respect, our fellow James Lynch, if you watched on Octagon Outlook, I believe, go again to the YouTube channel, give this video a like, and go check out that video and give it a like. James Lynch said this kind of has a void list written all over it. And I totally get that, whether it's a Bobby Green fight, because you're either someone who writes off Bobby Green or you're someone like me who understands striking and counters, and are seeing those things and are not writing a guy off because he trash talks, and understanding the value of trash talking, which we'll talk about for not just this matchup, but for this quiet pandemic era. The Nate Diaz like fighters are the guys I'm looking at big time, Dan. That being said, with a caveat, if you are taking a shot on the dog here, I'm not saying I'm not. I'm not saying you won't see me talk about this on other podcasts, or I'm not saying you won't see this pop up on a betting sheet, perhaps. Regardless if it does or if it doesn't, this isn't a fight where you need to jump off a cliff either way. And to your point, if you're looking to play the favorite, you definitely need to be careful about playing a guy like Lando Venata for chalk. So I want to make those caveats clear, Dan. There's no disrespect for someone thinking that it's even. There's no disrespect for someone that wants nothing to do with this line or fight. But back to your original question, Dan. When you see it at plus 130, moving up from plus 125. Granted, I know it initially got bet down from the opener, but again, we're seeing the faith once again kind of trend back toward the favor of Venata. I don't know if I trust it. Now, if you look at the numbers, which I'm not a big stats guy because they're very misleading, the numbers will tell you that Lando Venata doesn't gas. And to Lando Venata's credit, he's become a much better counterpuncher, Dan, since their first fight meeting at UFC 216. And as we know, like I just said with Bobby Green, these judges hate or rewarding, or they just can't see it, which I think it's more the latter, counterpunching. So it's always very dangerous to bet on a counterpuncher, folks. As much as I love him, I'll be the first to tell you it's dangerous to bet him for that reason. Lando is doing a bit of it himself too. However, I think Bobby Green, as we saw in that fight, even though he doesn't have the leg kicks, and even though people like me stand about his underrated wrestling, he doesn't use it in the stymieing way that Drakkar Klose does to steal rounds. Even though he doesn't do those two key things that work very well against Lando Venata, he does have straight shots that against Lando Venata, who I don't think it's right. They shouldn't award just for artificial damage. Which was an argument we had on last weekend's main event, which we're not going to have to revisit here. But the point is, Lando Venata shows tons of damage, and Bobby Green's going to be hitting those straight shots all the time. He's going to be talking his trash, which I have a theory that I won't get into now, could hurt him against judges. But I do think it brings out the Lando Venata that Bobby Green's going to need to both land shots as well as possibly get Lando to gas. Am I on a roller coaster here, Dan? Am I wrong for these thoughts? Stop me if you think I'm wrong here. I don't know.
No, not at all. And I mean, look, I'll always have a soft spot for Bobby Green back when he cashed that plus 250 against Josh Thompson. Those were the days back then, you know? So as far as this matchup, I think it is a tough one to call. I think it is a dog or pass situation, and I will go and pick the dog outright. But again, it's hard to trust both guys at the betting window. So I would only want plus money if I was investing in a spot like this, Dan.
Absolutely. And to Lando's credit, he did get the better of wrestling exchanges, which was pretty surprising. Both these guys were standout high schools, and they kind of dropped out and went toward MMA in their college years. So that is worth noting to give Lando plenty of credit there. He's making plenty of improvements. He seems to have his camp thing figured out. But again, man, I think it, Bobby Green can shut down guys who need that wrestling outlet, whether it's a primary weapon like Clay Guida or like Lando Venata, who does use it to kind of get his breaks. I don't think Bobby Green's going to be giving those breaks. So I will join you, Dan, with taking the dog here.
And in the middleweight division, we got a matchup between Kevin Holland and Officer Trevin Giles. You know, he is a police officer. He's been working during this pandemic, which leads me to ask, has he been training during this pandemic? And that's one thing we're gonna have to pay attention to when these two hit the scales. Because like I told you already, Dan Tom, during the pandemic era, there's a lot of money to be made watching these weigh-ins, man, because some of these guys have been showing up so out of shape, and they've been losing at an 100% clip. Let me just give you a few examples. John Volante against Maurice Green. And before anyone says anything in the comments about that fight, let's just review the facts. The facts are all three judges had Maurice Green up 2-0 heading into the third. And another fact is Maurice Green finished him in the third. So he's up 2-0, and then he finishes him in the third. I know Volante had one little moment, but people acting like Volante was on his way to winning that fight, that's total BS. Another one, Kevin Aguilar versus Charles Rosa. Kevin Aguilar shows up. You're like, dude, is that Kevin or is that Kevin's cousin? And he goes out there, loses to Rosa. This new kid, Zaruk Adashev, goes in there against Tyson Nam. Looks like he ate a couple cheeseburgers on the walk to the weigh-in, gets knocked out in 20 seconds. And last but not least, this past weekend, easiest money of the year, Tom Aspinall against Jay Collier. I mean, look, we're used to Jay Collier from 185, from 205. We're thinking, hey, this might be a back and forth competitive fight. Then you see this 264-pound slob show up to the scale. And you're like, oh, so I'm betting Aspinall, so 100% hit rate for the guys fighting, the people that are completely out of shape. Now, the reason I bring that up, I don't have any proof that Trevin hasn't been training. However, I do know that, he's been serving his community this entire time. There's a chance that could have taken away from, his training. So I'm going to be paying very close attention to how he looks on the scale on Friday, Dan.
Yeah, man. I mean, he was a guy who liked to fight at higher weight classes because I don't want to call the guy disciplined or lazy, especially a guy who's serving his community. But let's be honest, it's a laissez-faire attitude, even on the LFA kind of regional scenes. If you're going to be fighting out of your weight class, especially if your goal is to get on the big show, it's not like the old days where you just do tough above your weight class and then come back down. Because even back in those days before the tough, those guys on the regionals were still competing at the weight class they were supposed to be. And Trevin Giles is not the biggest middleweight when he does make it. And again, shouting out to our guy James Lynch there. He has said he's been very busy, and it's been a tough time. Even before, from what I remember, I just tried to punch him in here to the old Instagram to see if there was any shape. I didn't even see his account come up, Dan, which I don't blame him. Again, being a cop during these times, he wasn't exactly posting a lot, anyways, prior to fights, before all this madness that's going on in our current climate, right? But I do bring that up because it is relevant. How much is that going to be distracting him? According to his own words, to speaking to our own James Lynch, he was saying he barely even gets time to see his family. How much time is he really getting to train? Because he is, to your point, Dan, serving the community. That's a big question mark. Whereas Kevin Holland, who is taking the fight on shorter notice, has it. Kevin Holland's a wild man. He fits that intangible, first of all, to take fights on short notice. This is the pandemic era where everybody's already kind of on a level playing field. And Dan, you want to talk about level playing field, training opportunities, travel. These are both Texas boys. So they're dealing with the same regulations. They're dealing with the same amount of travel here. And regardless of what you think about Trevin Giles, last fight, I don't think he's going to have a jiu-jitsu black belt coach on the judging cards. This fight isn't in Texas. This is in Vegas. And speaking of black belts, Kevin Holland, who was already a respected Travis Luter brown belt, I believe, during this pandemic era, finally got that black belt promotion. So perhaps we could see a little bit of that action depending on who looks to take it to the ground.
Not only are they both Texas boys, they both actually share the same management. So KO Reps is going to be very excited and watching this fight very closely to see exactly what happens. And to go back to that Bobby Green talk, and you were mentioning how you kind of like the subtle trash talk. Well, here comes enter Kevin Holland. You know what I mean? And I love Kevin Holland, man. And I feel
Yeah.
like I've got a very different view than a lot of people, because people will talk about how he makes all these dumb decisions and this and that, and it's like, yeah, he takes a lot of risks. I'm not going to debate that, but I don't think he's a dumb guy at all. Like, I actually think he's very intelligent. If you hear him talk, like, the guy is he's actually pretty bright. So I disagree with this whole, Kevin Holland has the, suspect fight IQ. I think that, yeah, does he like to kind of put on a show sometimes and do some extra things that he probably doesn't need to do? Yes, obviously, no doubt about it. But when you talk about being a talented fighter, I mean, this guy knocked out Jeff Neal, right? Like, this
Yep.
guy's going out there and winning the majority of his UFC fights. So I think Kevin Holland's the real deal. And not only that, he's got such physical tools. He's got like a 7-inch reach advantage in this fight. And when you talk about suspect decision making, I actually think you got to hand that over to Trevin Giles. I feel like he's the one who had a couple of fights where it seemed like, hey, he's about to go out there and win these fights. And then he gets choked out in the third round with the same choke 2 fights in a row, Dan. And his last one against James Krause, who we all respect James Krause. But let's be honest again, James Krause took that fight on a day notice. James Krause was only in that city because he
Yeah.
was cornering someone else. And then they're like, hey, James, actually, you got to fight too. So you think James was about to turn down a near 6-figure paycheck? I know for a fact he wasn't. And he still went out there and arguably won the fight on one judge's scorecard. So, I mean, I feel like Kevin's got to do something super questionable to lose this fight. He's got to take it to a different gear than we've ever seen before to lose this fight. So I got Kevin Holland here.
I'm with you there. The last thing on Kevin Holland and perhaps this matchup is just a double-edged sword to kind of cover both bases where um the, you know I would argue that Kevin Holland also does his best work through adversity. If you look at past shorter camp or shorter notice fights, or even fights where he got injured, he's the kind of guy where he'll get injured. And we saw this a couple cards ago. I can't remember. There's been so many fights, but there are certain fighters where they'll get injured and all of a sudden they turn into a process-driven fighter. We see Kevin Holland keeping his guard up, using a jab, winning the round despite being injured. I mean, that's the kind of things you want to see especially in fighters that are having to perform through adverse conditions. Like, again, not trying to drown you guys out with it. We're only mentioning it because it's relevant to both what we're talking about and the betting aspect here. But yeah, the pandemic era, man, I want to see these performers, these game day performers. But the double-edged sword, to your point, the only way to seeing Kevin Holland lose this fight is if Jay Giles there kind of throws a really stubbornly slow fight, and it leaves Kevin Holland having to shit talk himself, possibly out of a decision. Because Dan, I'm not going to go into it now, but a big canary in my coal mine theory is that whenever there's things like shit talk or a late shot, i.e., Gedalia Joanna round one. Remember when people used to always argue about that fight? Gedalia won, Joanna didn't win. And you could make the argument that Gedalia wins the third round in a clutching round of the fight. But what does she do? She throws a late shot at the very end. And so you're telling me, if the round's close and you're a judge there, and I'm like, oh, the round's close, who do I give it to? And you see one fighter act a fool, you're not going to your human bias is not going to go toward the person who didn't act a fool. And I think we've seen that even in scorecards that Kevin Holland won. If you really look closely, perhaps he lost certain cards or rounds he shouldn't have. But again, my theory is that when your trash talking isn't working and you're not putting the volume behind it, it can be a very dangerous game to play, because whether it's right or wrong, and I think it's wrong. I'm with you, Dan. People misunderstood Holland. I think he's smarter than people give him credit for. But if we're being objective, that is a canary in a coal mine that leads to, I guess, the one worry on how he can lose this fight. This is MMA after all.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I feel like for him to lose this fight, he's got to get caught with something big. I do not see Trevin Giles winning the long-term battle here. I feel like the output, the length, and just the well-rounded skill set of Kevin Holland is too much. And people do criticize his takedown defense, but it's like he's so damn good at scrambling out of positions and situations that he doesn't really need to worry about, getting taken down and held down. I mean, I don't think Trevin Giles brings that black belt threat like a Brennan Allen, where this guy's
Yeah.
such a specialist that he takes your back and you better pray he slips off. You know what I mean? You better pray it was like those LFA days when Brendan Allen was a purple belt. But now that Brendan Allen's a black belt, his style works amazingly. So I don't really see that being much of an issue. It's just, look, Trevin Giles, he's a big boy. He hits hard. He's won a lot of fights. So, you can't completely disrespect him. But who do I think is the better fighter? Who do I think is the smarter fighter? Who do I think projects higher in the long run? Kevin Holland, 10 times out of 10.
Yeah, all respect to Giles, but he's not the Michael Chiesa of the middleweight division like Brendan Allen. So, yeah, I agree with you there.
So, Dan Tom, we got to talk about a 14-year age gap, because we got Jonathan Martinez welcoming back Frankie Saenz to the octagon. And, Frankie Saenz, got to tip my cap to him, former D1 wrestler. This is a guy that had an unbelievable war with Uriah Faber back in the day. And man, he's just someone that, one thing I like about Frankie Saenz is that, he was never the biggest guy for the weight class. He was never the hardest hitting guy for the weight class, but he was always that guy that he'll give it 100 every single time. And I like that about Frankie Saenz. He's an effort giver, a max effort giver. So you got to always tip your cap to a guy like him. But at 40 years old, taking on this young stud and Jonathan Martinez, I'm questioning if he's going to be able to win this fight based off his motor, based off just how much he wants it, his willingness to win. Because it's like, yeah, I think he can get a takedown or two, but it's like, what happens after that, Dan Tom? Is he going to hold him down? Is he going to beat this kid up? Because I truly believe on the feet, one knee, one straight to the chin, one high kick, even the low kick systematically dismantling him. And I think there's a recipe for a knockout here, actually.
I agree. Actually, I really like that you said the knockout. And perhaps stay tuned to Line Movement for more on my thoughts of that particular angle. But from breaking down the fight as is, I don't disagree with the line. After all, the show is called Line Movement. Wouldn't be surprised to see more line movement in Jonathan Martinez's way. I'm a big fan of southpaws, but more importantly, like you said, Dan, let's give Frankie Saenz his respect, because I'm a contrarian, Dan. I like the veterans, Dan. I like the wrestlers, Dan. I like making the case for the older guys, Dan. But man, I'm going to be 35 on August 7th, and 5 days later, Frankie Saenz turns 40 at bantamweight. Now, I know I just suggested in cash to play on a 41, soon to be 42-year-old lightweight, granted Monster Randuba, who admitted himself he's got to move up to welterweight. but that's a different division. It's still a light division, and that's also an outlier in Masaranduba, who, let's be honest, folks, who knows if that guy's human? I don't. Um, I don't think
Masaran Duba for president.
that's right. Yep. I mean, I don't much respect to tough wrestlers. I know you got the respect for the grindy wrestlers, Dan, but that's a different animal. Frankie Saenz is compared to a Masa Randuba. It's a different outlier. I mean, even the outliers amongst all outliers, Dominic Cruz, man, say what you will, but there's a lot of reasons why he did and was probably going to lose that fight. But man, he really, even he showed his age, and that guy's an outlier, right? I don't blame anybody taking that angle, but more importantly, the angle, the analysis, which is my more specialty, but specifically Southpaw analysis, Dan. Yes, Frankie Saenz is 1-0 against Yuri Alcantara, a guy me and you really respect, a guy who, go look at his resume, folks. And no disrespect to Frankie Saenz, I'm not going to take away that win he got. But yes, it was 5 years ago. Yes, Alcantara has gone on a downward skin, was already in his elder years when they fought then, you could argue, right? However, even though Chito Vera, who can finish a lot of guys and will fight from orthodox stance, will also switch to that southpaw stance, it really looked to befuddle Frankie Saenz before that finish came. And against a southpaw like Martinez, who, by the way, beat Andre Ewell the last time out. So people holding that against him should be careful. And even people, holding the Sukumta thing against them, I would even defend that to a certain extent as far as not condemning Martinez for it. That being said, I like Martinez here. And man, it's, by the way, he looks like he's been getting his training in for at least a month and a half to 2 months over at Factory X Denver and Elevation. I think he's going to be out. He's going to be able to outlast and survive the storms of Frankie Saenz and get himself a finish inside the distance. Is my breakdown.
Look, we just got to make sure that Frankie Saenz' middle name is not Andre, because for whatever reason, Jonathan can't beat guys named Andre. So as long as that's not his middle name, I think that he's going to be good to go here. And look, I honestly feel like if Frankie Saenz was 10 years younger, he'd be a flyweight. When he was a bantamweight, when he was fighting with guys like Uriah Faber and Yuri Alcantara, and Yuri's a big bantamweight, by the way, but I'm just saying, back then, you could see these tiny guys in the bantamweight division, but now you see these bantamweights coming up now, Dan Tom. You see Marlon Chito Vera. You saw how big he looked compared to Frankie Saenz. You see Sean O'Malley, who's, almost a 6 foot tall bantamweight. The days of being, a tiny bantamweight are over, man. It's just he can't move to flyweight because he's 40 years old. So he just can't. He's just from a different era of the sport. We tip our cap to guys like that. I love Frankie Saenz. Like I said, I respect hard workers. I respect what he brings to the table. That grind. It's just that, sorry, man, it's a different era of the sport now. So yeah, I got Jonathan Martinez by knockout. And speaking of the line movement, because I'm glad you brought that up, linemovement.com. Follow us at line_movement. Shout out to everyone behind the scenes. It opened minus 230 for Jonathan Martinez. Then immediately the public takes it to minus 185 for Jonathan Martinez. So a lot of action came in on signs. Now we're looking at minus 255 Jonathan Martinez. So it's actually steeper than when it initially opened, Dan Tom. So yeah, and honestly, I think rightfully so. Look, I know Jonathan Martinez is not a D1 wrestler. I know his wrestling defense, his takedown defense is not the best. It's just that I don't really picture Frankie holding him down for 2 of the 3 rounds, because it doesn't have to be 15 straight minutes. He only needs 2 of the rounds. And in fact, in some fights, he only needs 2 takedowns. Take him down once in the first, don't let him get back up. Take him down once in the second, don't let him get back up, and then just go coast in the third. It's just, I don't see that being realistic against a young, hungry lion like Jonathan Martinez, who is improving every single fight, Dan Tom.
And last point, because you know me, it would be a cardinal sin for me of all people to not ignore the young striker with a bad takedown defense against because that seems like, again, it seems like I should be coming in on the other side here if you go by my stereotypes, right? However, I will note that the more important thing with age gap is not condemning Saenz for being old, but giving credit for Martinez being young. Credit as in this is the age and point of his career where he can improve. And last point, if you look at his Instagram, the dude's had not only good wrestlers who were already trained in that Denver, Colorado Factory X area, but they've had Olympic wrestlers in the mix he's been training with since June, for whatever that's worth.
Nice. I'm glad to hear that. Again, in this day and age, you pay attention to the weigh-ins. Like, because I know people are like, oh, why do people even look at the weigh-ins? It doesn't mean shit. It's like, okay, keep thinking that. Be my guest and keep thinking that, because I've noticed it is profitable during this era to watch the weigh-ins. So that's exactly what I'm going to be doing Friday morning, Dan Tom.
You've proved that already, sir.
So in the light heavyweight division, we got a battle between two former middleweights, Ed Short Fuse Herman versus Gerald Meerschaert. And, I said two former middleweights, but, Ed has gotten his feet wet at light heavyweight a little bit more recently than Meerschaert has. And man, I don't even know where to begin on this one. I feel like they're both jiu-jitsu black belts. For Meerschaert, he lives and dies by the scrambles, by the chokes, even though, he did knock out Eric Spicely with a body kick. We didn't forget that, Gerald. Don't worry about that. But with Ed Herman, he's not exactly known for being the fastest guy, but he's decently well-rounded. I mean, like, if your boxing ain't up to par, he will crack you with some hard stuff. He's got some veteran moves in the clinch off his back. I mean, he's decently well-rounded. It's just that oftentimes Ed Herman is the slower guy. And it's funny to say that because oftentimes Gerald Meerschaert is the slower guy. So I'm curious who the slower guy is in this fight, Dan Tom.
That's interesting, man, because yeah, the speed I don't know is going to be as much of a factor, and even the weight, because yes, on one hand they are both formal middleweights, but what I believe you were alluding to, and I agree with you, Dan, is that let's be honest, Ed Herman is fully settled in and dadded himself into the light heavyweight division. Ed Herman's got so much dad vibes going on now that I actually would be, and I'm actually going to pick Meerschaert here. I actually would be just as confident in Ed Herman's chances winning a heavyweight fight as I do Ed Herman winning a light heavyweight fight against a former middleweight, if that makes sense, as to where Ed Herman just finds himself congealing these days, for lack of a better word. And I like Ed Herman. I'm not trying to come off as disrespecting the guy, but it is interesting because as much experience as he's going to have, like, Meerschaert said a line that made me giggle in a James Lynch interview where he said, man, I'm usually the veteran coming into this stuff, and I look at Ed Herman's record. This guy makes me look like I just started. But the interesting thing is, even though Ed Herman has that vast record, folks, can you believe that he's only fought 3 southpaws over his tenure in the UFC? You got to go back 15 years, Dan, to find his only southpaw victory against a guy named Chris Price, who I believe only went 0-2 like 15 years ago in the UFC. And the other 2 fights, of course, he went 1-2, were stoppage losses against Derek Brunson by knockout and Damian Maia by submission. So southpaws, relevant southpaws, not a lot of experience, not a lot of success for Ed Herman. I think it's going to be an ugly fight, basically, Dan, but I think the mobility and the southpaw angles, if you will, of old GM3, I think will probably win him the day here.
Real quick, do you by chance off the top of your head know Meerschaert's history with southpaws?
No, I don't have his history with southpaws off the top of my head, but Ed Herman's orthodox, right? Isn't he?
See, this is why he's the analyst. This is why we got guys like you here. That was such an irrelevant question. I appreciate you, my man. But look, as far as this matchup is concerned, I got a lot of questions going into it, and I don't even really know where to start, like I already told you. And basically, one of my angles is Gerald Meerschaert got knocked out less than 2 months ago. So
Yes, totally.
there's a chance that he hasn't trained even once, but then again, because he was on suspension. But then again, a guy like him, he probably looks at his suspension and he's like, "You're not going to tell me what to do. I'm GM3, bitch." So I could totally see GM3 the day after the fight going back in the gym and sparring. He just seems to me like he comes from such an old school era of the sport that, like, he was probably taking fights the day of the fight. You know what I mean? They need a short notice guy like, "Hey, Gerald, you want to fight in 30 minutes?" You know what I mean? So I don't really think that, like, I would not be surprised if he's been training this entire time. But then again, I would also not be surprised that now that he's had so many damn fights, he's so experienced that he might have actually been like, now it's time to be smart with my career. Now I'm actually going to, listen to this medical suspension and not fight. So I'm going to be paying attention to what he looks like on the scales too. I got to know if this guy's in shape or not, moving up, 20 pounds and the whole bit. So I'm curious and I'm not really sure which way to lean. So oftentimes when I'm not sure which way to lean, I go with the dog. The thing is, I could be way off, and there's a chance that it's not a 50-55. There's a chance that Mearshart does go out there and dominate him, because when you look at the opening line, they opened it almost 2-1 for Mearshart. So they're thinking minus 195. They think like, hey, he should all but go out there and beat Ed Herman, who hasn't looked the best lately, but is crafty and veteran savvy enough to get some wins along the way. So this is a tough fight to call, because when I think about it, it's like Mearshart ain't the fastest, just like Herman. Mearshart doesn't have the best boxing. I would say Herman's got better boxing than Mearshart, but Mearshart's got some devastating kicks on the feet. So as far as the stand-up, they're going to be moving in quicksand, but it's going to. I'm interested to see who gets the better of the strikes. Like, I think Ed Herman can land the better hands, but Mearshart can land the better kicks. And then on the mat, I would assume that Mearshart would be the one landing the takedowns. It's just, can he hold a guy like that down? We know that Mearshart sometimes likes to sell out, going for submissions. He can give up position. A guy like Ed Herman can get on top and kind of ride the round out if that happens. So I'm really not sure what to think right now. And it's been a long ass time since Ed Herman's been submitted. So I don't know. I'm gonna lean with the dog since I don't know.
Not crazy there. I do think it's a classic dogger pass situation. I don't want to say it's biased because I'm not going to pretend or front like I know Gerald Mearshart. I just like the guy. I like his style. That being said, I like Ed Herman too. In fact, I've been one of the few Ed Herman supporters people following me. I called the knockout actually exactly by knee for Tim Bosch and played him even in his last time out, despite, for the last 5 or 10 years, everyone going, oh, Ed Herman, all the breakdowns on Ed Herman. He's slow. He sucks. He's old. He's molasses. And that's all the breakdown you're really going to get on it. And I get why people are saying that. I'm not hating. I'm just saying to the point, I've been an Ed Herman supporter to the point where the guy's made me money even recently. So in no way am I overlooking him here, despite technically picking him the other way. I agree with you on that aspect, Dan, of it being dog or pass. And speaking of the knee, I think the knee, especially if this gets into a tired slog fest, Gerald Mearshart, whether he's going for the takedown or not, he can throw himself out of position. His posture, can be broken. So I think that knee's going to be live. However, I think on the feet, the body kick, the southpaw body kick for, the almost shelling like defense of Herman, that's going to be live for Mearshart. And on the ground, you're right. People should not be sleeping on Ed Herman's skills. He is a really talented grappler. However, his age and hips worry me that if it gets beyond the clinch, I'm not sure he can grapple to the level he could before. So again, mobility both on the feet, on the floor, has me slightly siding with Mearshart, but in no way am I saying to support the money on the favorite here.
It's just not often that you use a quality like mobility to describe an advantage that Gerald Mearshart has in a fight, right? You know what I mean?
That's weird, right? It's weird. Mobility pairs all pace because he can gas as well. Like, it's weird that those are going to be his strengths here, but
yeah. And for the record, I like Mearshart too. I mean, the guy follows me. I sponsor his teammate Emmanuel Sanchez. I like the guys at Rufus Sport. I'm a fan. It's just, again, taking all that stuff aside, when I'm not sure, and I could be way wrong, because sometimes I think something's a coin flip and it's not. So there's a chance I'm way off. I mean, Vegas said it almost 2-1 for a reason. Watch Mearshart go out here and get a first round submission. I'm not going to be surprised. But for me, when I watched it, I was like, man, it could go either way. So I'll lean with the plus 140 dog here.
Last note on that, you could look at it 2 angles. The knockout you can't overlook. That's definitely red flag territory. However, in same said interview with James Lynch, Mearshart said he checked himself for pupils, night of, concussion symptoms, was clear of all that and got back into training. So you can take the aspect of it's very dangerous, which it is, or the aspect of he never got to get going against Heinisch. So essentially you got an already in shape trained guy that doesn't have to cut any weight. It's ready to show his skills.
Yeah, there's that. Now, the training part, so he's going to be in shape. We're not going to expect to see a pregnant Gerald Mearshart on the scales. That part's good. As far as him diagnosing himself on the concussion part, that's a different talk we can address some other time, because you know how these fighters are, like, oh, I wasn't hurt. Oh, I was completely fine. Oh, this and that. Oh, I can cut 20 pounds in 5 hours. Like, dude, fighters will say the most ridiculous shit you've ever heard in your life. Like, I got a buddy who's got to cut 30 pounds in 30 days. And like, to him, he's like, oh, dude, I got this. I'm like, dude, let's push the fight back an extra month. Do this the right way. You're not going to have to kill yourself, because I know that final day when you're lying in the sauna, you're begging me to let you out. I'm not going to let you out. So you know how these fighters are. They're too tough for their own good. So him saying like, "Oh, I was complete," even though I got knocked out because of the thing with my pupils, I'm gonna go train sparring the next day. So yeah, I got to see exactly how he performs. You know what I mean? Before I put any stock in any stuff like that.
Absolutely. Great point. Yep.
So last but not least, the curtain jerker, the first fight of the night. We got Chris Gutierrez taking on Atlanta's own Cody Durden. And this is a hell of a fight because I'm very familiar with both guys. Obviously, Chris Gutierrez went out there and cashed me a nice bet against Vince Morales, his last fight. I mean, he destroyed that guy from the first kick to the last kick. I mean, that was a leg kick TKO. It was a Muay Thai clinic. And if you fight a guy like Chris Gutierrez at distance, if you try to, trade Muay Thai techniques with a guy like Chris Gutierrez, he's not just going to beat you, Dan Tom. He's going to style on you. He's going to get off on 5 calf kicks in a row. They're all going to be screaming, oi, oi. And then he's going to go with that spinning kick to the head, and you're going to be embarrassed. Then you start to shoot. Then he throws a flying knee. You don't know how to read this guy, right? So if Cody Durden wants to come out here and, you throw one, I throw one, let's do the traditional Muay Thai for MMA kind of fight, then Cody Durden's not just going to lose, he's going to get blown out the water. However, I know Cody Durden very well. I've commentated his fights. I've even sparred with the guy before on multiple occasions. I know him very well. We've spoken on the phone. I know him. And let me just say this. Cody Durden is a wrestler with a wrestling background. I mean, he'll go forward the entire time. This guy does not take a back step whatsoever. So for Chris Gutierrez to win this, just know this is not going to be like the Vince Morales fight. Cody Durden is not going to show him any respect like Vince Morales did. Cody Durden's going to bite down on that mouthpiece, go in there, throw some hands, and then immediately shoot for the takedown. Now, what happens after that remains to be seen. Now, what we've seen so far is that Gutierrez does not have the best takedown defense. And to take it a step further, he's not the best off his back either. The times that we've seen him off his back, he hasn't really been able to get back up. I mean, I know Raoni Barcelos is a black belt and he's amazing and this and that. He was able to easily take him down, pass, take the back, choke him out. But even that next fight against Geraldo de Freitas, and you got to give credit to Gutierrez to not just win that fight, but to win the decision in Brazil. That counts for a lot in my book, Dan Tom. So much respect to Chris Gutierrez. And by the way, Chris was a dog in that fight, right? So those are the times we've seen him on the mat, right? And the Geraldo de Freitas fight, it could have gone either way, but I personally thought that Chris kind of edged it out. But then Ryan Mcdonald, who's not in the UFC anymore, who doesn't belong in the UFC, he's not a wrestler. We know he's not a wrestler. He's kind of like a Gumby tall man punching bag. You already know the deal. Now, one thing Cody Durden is a wrestler who is aggressively pursuing takedowns the entire time. So I know Cody hasn't fought the same level of competition and all that, but it's not like he's coming in here with less than 10 pro fights. He's at least had 13 pro fights. He's even competed in pro boxing and kickboxing before. So he's no spring chicken at all. Now, again, like I said, if he tries to come out here and trade kicks with a guy like Gutierrez, his calf's going to get kicked off, quite frankly. But the thing is that he's not going to do that. And this is a guy, when you talk about taking looks in the gym in terms of getting the right looks for an opponent like Chris Gutierrez, well, what's the one big weapon we associate with Gutierrez? The leg kicks. Tell me what big weapons you associate with Douglas Lima, Diego Lima, and Rafael Assunção. I'm pretty damn sure it's the leg kicks, right, Dan Tom? Well, those have been his main sparring partners his entire career. So I feel like he's seen the look of Chris Gutierrez. Now it's about executing that inside a fight in the octagon, which is a different story. Now, as far as, well, what kind of shape is Cody Durden in? Well, I mean, he won by first round TKO July 18th, 2 weeks ago, and he looked unbelievable, ran through the guy to a point where when I watched that fight, I called him immediately. I was like, hey, keep your phone on because that was a UFC level performance. Be expecting the call right away. 2 days later, he gets signed. So I think he's ready for this call right now. And look, if it was a pick'em fight, I'd probably lean Gutierrez. A minus 340 Gutierrez against a wrestler who can actually wrestle. F that. I'm going Cody Durden for the upset here.
I'm glad to get your opinion because I knew you were familiar with this guy, Dan. But I'll be honest, I haven't looked at his fights yet. I got his profile in front of me. This was one where I was looking at like, okay, I'm a big Chris Gutierrez fan, but this is some heavy chalk. is it justified? It's already, outside of my range, full disclosure. But, my lean is Gutierrez for experience and obvious reasons. Okay. I can see why he's favored, but by this much? And the reason why I emphasize durable southpaws who can wrestle, I planted that seed at the top of this show, Dan, was because of Cody Durden. Because what scared me off, not just listening to someone I respect like you talk about him, but when I pulled up his profile, I'm like, wait, this guy's a southpaw. He's a two-time Georgia State champ, which again, say what you will about comparing states versus states, that still speaks a lot. He's doing boxing and kickboxing. Again, maybe not at the highest level, but similar to what I was saying about Jesse Ronson last week, what does it show me? It shows me that the guy is serious about his skills. And those skills, as we saw with Jesse Ronson, can win you some pretty high level fights in the UFC. So, what is this guy, Durden doing? So I'm really excited to looking forward to seeing him because he's got the southpaw, he's got the wrestling background. He's got, again, I saw him training with the Lima brothers, which makes the leg kick connection, which you beautifully pointed out. So how durable is this cat? He hasn't been stopped yet in his career, win or lose. Sure, he might have lost to the slightly more notable names, but like we've seen, Dan, that doesn't always mean everything. As everybody keeps talking about Chimaev, right? Just because you don't have the competition doesn't mean the skills aren't there. We can have the arguments to how much those should be inflated another day. But the point is, I'm definitely scared away from a play. I haven't made it an official pick, but don't be surprised to see me on the same side. And even if I do officially pick Gutierrez, in no way in heck should anybody be playing him for this chalk. And even if you don't think Durden can win, maybe he's not your official pick, just by value, before I even put my elbow deep into this one, Dan, the value clearly seems to be on Durden here. So in no way can I call you crazy or bias or anything, because from an unbiased point of view, I totally see your logic.
Yeah, look, I'll tell you about how his two losses went because I'm so familiar with his entire career. I commentated one of his losses to Justin Scoggins' brother, Jared Scoggins. I'll tell you exactly how his two losses went. So the first loss against Jared Scoggins was basically wrestler versus wrestler, but Jared Scoggins was the bigger wrestler. Jared Scoggins kind of pinned him up against the fence and kind of won the wrestling battle for the 3 rounds. It wasn't like Cody was getting outstruck or anything like that. It was just two wrestlers. The bigger, stronger wrestler won that night. That's all it was. The second loss to Ryan Hollis was a situation where Cody dominated him the entire fight. And then the second round makes one mistake, actually got his back taken and got choked out. Didn't tap out, went to sleep. So it was a situation where it was like, hey, you were fighting a guy with near 30 pro fights. I mean, Ryan Hollis is a guy that's been in there with Henry Cejudo before, right? So it was a situation where it's like, hey, you got to know that you're not invincible and this and that. He didn't tap. He went to sleep. So those are his two losses. It's never been that he got outstruck and his takedowns got stuffed and he was getting his leg kicked off, which is what could happen here, which is what Chris wants to do here. Chris wants to stuff these takedowns and kick this kid's fucking calf off. And there's a chance he does it. I mean, I would say besides Marlon Moraes, that Chris Gutierrez is the hardest leg kicker in the entire bantamweight division. I could say that with a straight face and look you in the eye, Dan Tom. So I think that Cody Durden knows exactly what he wants, what he needs to do here. Now, whether he wins or loses remains to be seen. But one thing I can guarantee you, he's not going to go out like Vince Morales. He's not going to not throw a single shot the whole fight. He's not going to back up the whole time and just take kicks. Like Cody Durden is going to go out there and fight Gutierrez until he either wins or he either loses. So at least he will go out there and fight for your money. But I'm going to pick him outright because I feel like wrestling is Gutierrez's weakness. This kid's got a sneaky submission game. And I feel like he's had, like, at this point now, he's had enough experience to where he can compete in the UFC. If he would have got signed a couple of years ago, I'd be all over Gutierrez here. And Gutierrez might still win. Look, he's favored for a reason. But I'm just saying that since I've watched Cody Durden throughout his entire career, I know that now he's ready. Like, I never called him after any of his wins before until the last one, because the last one I was so blown away. I was like, dude, like that was I'm expecting his last fight, against John Sweeney, who's one of Wonder Boy's training partners. I'm thinking like, dude, like this is going into it. I was like, this is a 50-50 fight that could go either way. Like, but I'm kind of leaning Durden, but who knows, man? That's a tough fight. And Durden blows him out the water in a way where I was like, damn, like they better give this guy a call right now. And I actually sent you that fight to your inbox on Twitter. It's not really available anywhere. So I got you on his last 2 fights. You can watch them. But yeah, look, I know the guy personally, so there might be a little bias, but I'm trying to break down the fight as objectively as possible. Like if I was, if his style was being a leg kicker also against Gutierrez, and this was Muay Thai versus Muay Thai, I'd be given a completely different breakdown. Like it doesn't matter that we're friendly and stuff like that. It doesn't matter I commentate his fights or I sparred with him or whatever. It's just the fact that he actually does have the style to beat a guy like Gutierrez. So we'll see what happens on Saturday night when they square off, Dan Tom.
This is the insight of why you guys got to be tuning into this show right here. My man D Levy delivering the inside goods. I really appreciate that. I appreciate the inbox. I'm definitely going to get back to you on that, as the rest of y'all should keep an eye out at linemovement.com for my betting sheet for whatever I do take shots on. But I like that you bring that up, because unbiasedly, like if you look at it, even if Gutierrez does win, in my opinion, he's going to have to fight the perfect fight, even without seeing this kid on credential, to justify over a 3-1 spread that he's getting.
Yeah, for sure. And it's easy to say, oh, UFC debutant, short notice. That implies that you don't know he fought 2 weeks ago and is in perfect shape, right? So it's not like he's coming off the couch. And of course, even if he was coming off the couch, he'd accept the call. UFC, that's your dream. But the fact that he's already in perfect shape, it's not like, short notice. Let's see how you do on a full camp. No, this is a full camp. So let's see what happens when they get in there, Dan.
Super rare spot. You're right, Dan. Even a rarer spot in the pandemic era. Great point.
That's right. Well, everybody watching, thank you so much for your support. We truly appreciate it. Make sure you go to linemovement.com. Follow us at line_movement. Leave us your comments below. Let Dan know how good looking he is. Let me know how wrong I am. Let us know everything you got to tell us. We truly, truly appreciate everything. Last week they didn't like that We're Doomed play. But now I didn't see too many comments afterwards. But before the fact, I was getting everything but the kitchen sink thrown at me. Hopefully this week we can deliver as well. And we got to give a huge shout out to our producer, Jordan, to our editors, our graphics man behind the scenes. You guys are unbelievable. We truly, truly appreciate you. Joe, James, Dan, make sure y'all check out BlitzBet 2, Line Movement, I3. Guys, thank you so much. I'm out of here. Make sure y'all enjoy the fights, and we will speak very soon. Make sure you follow me at Best Fight Picks. Follow Dan at Dan Tom MMA. You can catch me at bestfightpicks.com or at Half the Battle later on. My boy Dan Tom is available at the Protect Your Neck podcast. Thank you all very much. Everybody stay safe and enjoy the fights.